All right. One second, let me back. Welcome everybody to the What is Dyslexia webinar. I am Dr. Kelly Salmon-Hurley. I'm one of the co-founders of the Dyslexia Training Institute.
And I'm Tracy Black-Zaretsky, the other co-founder of the Dyslexia Training Institute.
And since we are now talking consistently, I'm hoping that if any of you can't hear us, you'll let us know. But before we get started, just a few logistical things. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little gray area that says chat. If you click on the arrow next to chat, it will open up and you'll be able to expand the panel and you can ask your questions. Just make sure that you click to all participants when you do that so that everyone can see your question. Unless, of course, you have something private, then that's fine. You can send it privately. But if you want everyone to see it, including us, go ahead and put it there. Tracy and I, we each do portions of the PowerPoint, so when we're not speaking, we'll be answering questions in the chat box too, in case the presenter can't get to it while she is talking. At the Dyslexia Training Institute, we do online training. We offer training in Orton-Gillingham, structured word inquiry, reading comprehension strategies, overview of dyslexia assessment, pretty much everything about dyslexia. We do it. We obviously travel a lot right now. We are in Anchorage, Alaska, which is very cool. We're slightly concerned about our internet connectivity here in Alaska, but I think we'll be okay. And as I said that, I just realized I did not plug in my computer. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my computer. It's like doing this on live TV. And maybe Tracy can talk while I do that.
Well, and while she's doing that, I can add. So this year we also added to the services we provide our first ever virtual conference. And we will be having, it was a 2-week conference online. You watched pre-recorded webinars and could post your questions. And during that 2 weeks, the presenters would go on and answer your questions. And we had a fabulous keynote speaker, Amir Baraka. And this next year, we'll be having this, our second virtual conference. We have 2 keynote speakers that are amazing, and all of a sudden, both their names popped up in my head, John Rodriguez and Marcia Henry. Yeah, Marcia Henry. And it will be in April 2018, so be on the lookout for that.
Okay, I feel like there was something else I was going to say, and I got distracted by the fact that I didn't plug in my computer.
Oh, and the other online courses, we have 2 certification courses. One is to learn to implement the Orton-Gillingham approach, and we offer that twice a year. Once it begins in January, and one cohort begins in June. And we also have our Dyslexia Advocate certificate to learn how to help parents advocate in the through the public school system, and that we do once a year, and it begins in October. And we also, of course, have Kelly's amazing Dyslexia Advocate book. If you're needing help with advocacy, you can either purchase it on our website or go online and purchase it on Amazon. Now we're done with all that stuff. So I'll tell you a bit also about Kelly and I, why we started this, as long as why we started the Dyslexia Training Institute while she gets the PowerPoint ready, is because Kelly and I worked in adult literacy. It's where we met for many years. And we saw the lifelong effects of people who were not being taught how to read with the way they learned how to read, and most of them had undiagnosed learning disabilities. We learned that teachers don't get this training in their credentialing programs, including reading specialists and special education teachers. For most universities, don't teach them about what dyslexia is, or how to identify it, or how to remediate it. And so we were trying to get training in it and found it extremely, extremely difficult and very, very expensive, because we either had to fly to the East Coast and stay long periods of time, or fly people out to us and spend long periods of time. And we were like, we need to solve this problem because teachers want this information. And so we started the online format, and with the hopes of getting people access on the West Coast, and as it turns out, it's for people all over the United States and around the world have taken our online courses because they need access to the content. I am married to a 5th grade teacher. He's an amazing teacher, teaches in a Title I school. I also have 2 children that we adopted, and my son has dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADD combined type, affecting his executive functioning, some auditory processing deficit. So I not only do this for the love of my life, and the passion for what I do for work, but I also am grateful that I knew what I knew so that I could help my son. He's currently in 6th grade and reading on grade level. So I speak from a lot of not just work experience, but also personal experience.
And I just want to point out that while she was talking, I know there were a few pauses here and there, and that is because of where we are in the world at the moment. And I don't think it was too bad at all. So if we decide that it's something that can't be, that it was annoying or anything like that, we'll re-record this and post it. But I think it's okay. You only went out a couple times for like a second, so we were still able to get the meaning. And so I just want to make sure that you guys are able to hear and see me. Am I breaking up or coming in and out at all?
Oh, I'll just add, because
okay, so did you hear my question?
Yes.
Am I breaking up or coming in and out? Okay.
No, but I'll just add that Kelly went to share her whole screen, and your chat box looks like it maybe disappeared, but if you look at the top of your screen, it should say viewing Kelly, a green bar saying viewing Kelly Sandman Hurley's desktop. If you put your cursor over that, a box will drop down that has like mute me and all these types of things. And there's a chat, if you click on the chat box, your chat box will appear, and you can like shift it down into the corner or wherever you would like it on your screen so you can still see the PowerPoint. So you can see the chat box, you can still participate with the chat box even while she's sharing her screen.
Awesome. Okay, I definitely think it's time to get started because we have a lot of stuff to get through. And Momita, I know that you're saying breaking up slightly. Because you're in Trinidad, I think if you're only breaking up slightly, yeah, that's positive. We're good with that. Let me know if it gets too bad. But for those of you who are really far away, sometimes that is kind of what happens. But we're all over the world, which is beautiful. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started and talk about what dyslexia is. This is a picture of my son, and I put that there because I can, A, and B, because of his shirt. So obviously his, his shirt says dyslexia is real. And I used to start these presentations by saying, well, we can't move forward until we all agree that dyslexia is real. And I've since kind of restated that because I'm not going to tell you what to believe, but we have to make some kind of acknowledgement that something is going on for a really, really bright kid who is good at lots of other things and then is struggling with language. So it has to be something is there. It has to mean something is there. We're going to say here in this presentation that it's dyslexia. Oops, over here. Okay, so this is Amir Baraka, who was our keynote speaker, and he gave a speech on Capitol Hill a few years ago that I thought was a very moving speech, and I thought it was important for people to hear. So I'm going to play this for you. I'm going to play it for a couple seconds, and then I'm going to check in and make sure you can all see and hear it.
Good morning, Senators and panelists. I want to thank you for taking your value.
So can you all see and hear that? I stopped it. It's playing now, but okay.
My message.
Okay.
We're coming up on an important presidential election, and I know your time is important. I'm also not oblivious to the challenges we face as a country. One such challenge is the lifelong curse of dyslexia. 1 out of 5 live with this challenge each day of their lives. So many will never reach their full potential and enjoy this great country as you and I do. So many people have lost the will to believe because of the enemy of dyslexia. I allow dyslexia to control my life by robbing me of my God-given potential. Can you imagine, in my early teens, never wanting to be anything but a drug dealer? Neither my mother nor my school teachers were able to diagnose the reasons I had trouble learning. In my mind, pursuing a more formal education was irrelevant. I knew early in life that being a dentist, a physical therapist, a lawyer was out of my reach because I could not read. I turned to quicker pathways out of New Orleans projects. I saw men in my community making ways for themselves without having to read by selling drugs. And my defeatist attitude seemed to outweigh the positive values my grandmother tried to teach me. There were many more ingredients that helped me make my decision to sell drugs. For example, having my mother and siblings call me names such as dumb and stupid. Using names such as these can cause any child to feel hopeless and lost. You will notice I never mentioned my father in this presentation. That's because he left when I was 3 years old to chase his dreams of finding a better grade of heroin to use. It was the perfect storm for me. I chose to succumb to my environment while both brothers and sisters excelled in school. I didn't care about my future or anyone else because I thought I was my mother must have said. I became a street thug and full of anger because I felt cheated out of an education. I went to school just because I had to as a kid. Many Fridays I would malinger because I couldn't pass the spelling test, or I would sleep in project hallways until school was out to avoid the embarrassment. I pushed myself into a hole and I couldn't get out of it. My teachers had to know that I couldn't read. My young mother ran the streets and didn't seem to value my education. But what became the final thing that caused me to pledge my allegiance to the lives of the streets was a girl. I was in 6th grade and the girl I liked was in class. It was our first week of school. We were in English class and the teacher called upon me to read out loud. My palms began to sweat and it felt like drops of blood on my forehead. I couldn't pronounce any of the words and the teacher made me continue, knowing that I couldn't read. Some students laughed while others looked in amazement. From that day forward, I knew that school wasn't the place for me, and the young lady never really liked me much from that day forward. The streets became my classroom, and looking back, the lessons I learned were shameful. I shot and killed a young person because the street taught me that that's how you resolve conflict. After my release from prison at 15 years of age for manslaughter, I got back into the drug game, still never learning to read. I ended up doing prison time as an adult. I ran from the law for 4 years as a fugitive because I was facing 60 years for drug distribution, and I was guilty. I ended up doing 4 years by God's grace. A jury found me guilty of a lesser charge. At age 23, I entered a prison correctional facility reading on a 3rd grade level. I didn't feel bad because many of the men there were just like me. We all read poorly. But after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, I discovered that he dropped out in the 7th grade and still made something of himself. I thought for the first time in my life that I could accomplish something, too. I worked hard writing down each word I couldn't pronounce. I just kept memorizing words and writing letters and reading short books. A GED teacher noticed that I was struggling with phonics and had me tested. He asked if my siblings could read. I told him that my siblings went to college. After testing me, he said that I have a reading disability and it could be corrected if I was willing to work hard. I would write words down wrong, so I sat in front of the class to double check. I worked for 4 years trying to attain my GED. My reading ability surged and I was ready to take the test. I passed and started helping others in math and vocabulary building. Since my release from prison, I went on to model for clothing lines like Nike. Also, I went to acting class and worked with Academy Award winner Jessica Lange, Kathy Bates, Angela Bassett, Forrest Whitaker, Blair Underwood, Hill Harper, and many others. I've produced 4 independent films and written my first book titled The Chose The Street Slide to Me. It is meant to inspire others who are just like I was, hiding in the shadows and not getting help. It is also for those who believe that dealing drugs is not the way. Today there are schools available for kids to fight dyslexia, schools such like the Cassidy's has. Thank you for your time and consideration.
So that's pretty powerful stuff, right? Hang on. So the reason we show that is because in the dyslexia world, in the dyslexia community, at least here in the States, there's a large push for remediation, legislation, advocacy, and there's a lot of people saying that you have to go get outside tutoring, and all of that's true. But we have to remember that there are probably more kids out there like Amir than there are kids who have parents who have the means. And so I really like to show that because Tracy and I both worked in adult literacy before we came here. And the reason that I do what I do is because of the adults in the adult literacy program. And so I really remember the stories about being a kid in a low socioeconomic neighborhood, or not, don't even have to be in a low socioeconomic neighborhood. You can just have unsupportive parents, or parents who are unsupportive because they don't know better, or whatever the reason is. There are more kids out there who don't have an advocate, who don't have that person, that we really have to make change in the school in order to get them help. So there are kids like Amir who are obviously very bright, obviously very resilient, but unless somebody steps in and lets them know what's going on, this is the road that they could take. And, you know, if you look at the present statistics and literacy, you know it's true. So we just like to use him as a really good example to remember about the kids who don't have the resources to have outside tutoring and don't have the parents who are going to make sure that they get all the extracurricular activities that they're good at and all of that kind of stuff. So just a nice little reminder there. If you have any questions about that, let me know. Tracy, if you have anything you want to add to that, let me know. So in the chat box, go ahead and type in what you think dyslexia is. Just a couple words. You don't have to give a full definition. Just a couple things that you think of when you think of the word dyslexia. Okay, processing disorder, mixing up letters and words, a learning disability, yep. And you know, the learning disability term, we actually don't put this in our presentation. We don't put this on our presentation. Sorry, someone just sent me a private message and it took me off track. But I prefer, dyslexia is interesting because kids with dyslexia can learn just fine. They can't read and spell. So I don't know, you know, I think I usually refer to it as a reading disability or a reading and spelling disability, but I get what you're saying. Under federal law, it's definitely a learning disability, right? Inability to read sounds into letters, inability to accurately decode words. Okay, so here are a couple of things that we hear out there in the field. So Tracy and I are also advocates. We go to a lot of IEPs, so we hear a lot of interesting things. Common things that we hear are seeing letters and words backwards. She's in the 3rd grade. She's already outgrown her dyslexia. Dyslexia is caused by the head. Dyslexia is just an umbrella term. That one's really interesting because people say that in IEP meetings because they're, I'm not quite sure, well, because they think dyslexia is kind of the thing that doesn't really have an official definition or specific characteristics. But the umbrella term under IDEA is specific learning disability. And underneath that umbrella term are qualifying conditions. And dyslexia is a disability listed as a qualifying condition under specific learning disability. So they actually have it backwards when they say that. We don't work with dyslexia. If you've ever stepped foot on in a school campus and you've ever taught a class with more than 20 kids for 1 year, you've worked with a kid with dyslexia. And dyslexia isn't part of special education law, and it is part of special education law. It always has been. It's been there since day one of special education law. A lot of districts, classrooms, schools, whatever, they like to say dyslexia isn't real, isn't part of it, without really checking their facts, and that just kind of gets passed down. So, you know, you have the whole old wives' tales. I call this old administrator tales, because people just pass it down from administrator to administrator, and this is like the line that they toe in a meeting, but no one ever really stops to check. But it is part of special education law. We actually don't have this in our presentation either, but if you look if you Google the OSET memo from 2015, there's a dyslexia guidance letter that really speaks to that issue. And that is for our United States participants, because I'm not really sure about all of the rest of the world as far as legal law and things like that. And Tracy just posted it in the chat box. Okay, so what is dyslexia? So let's look at what the word is. It's DYS, which means difficulty with, and LEX, which means words, and IA, which is the noun-forming suffix. Let me move this over so everyone can see it. Okay, which is the noun-forming suffix. So dyslexia is difficulty with words. It's not difficulty with vision. It's not difficulty with hearing. It's not difficulty with mental capacity. It's difficulty with words. And dyslexia is not caused by poor eyesight or hearing problems. Vision therapy and covered overlays will not help students with dyslexia. If anybody ever offers vision therapy or covered overlays as an intervention for dyslexia, they're seriously misguided. Poor tracking is usually the result of dyslexia, not the cause. So the all presence, convergence issues, poor tracking, all of those things can be seriously misdiagnosed because dyslexia is what's causing those issues because they don't have a lot of experience with print. So when you don't have a lot of experience with print, it can cause poor tracking issues and convergence issues. That's not to say that poor tracking and convergence don't exist. But when it comes to a kid with dyslexia, The intervention is not vision therapy. The intervention is reading and writing therapy. If a kid really has poor tracking and convergence and it's not dyslexia, then sure, vision therapy might not be appropriate. We have to really be careful that we're diagnosing the right thing when we do that. It's not seeing words or letters backwards. People with dyslexia see words and letters the same way you and I do, or people who don't have dyslexia do. I'm not going to assume that there are people here who do not have dyslexia. It's not a developmental disability. It's not acquired alexia, aphasia, or anomia. It's not a degenerative disease. It's not a disease at all. You can't cure dyslexia. Tom Cruise cannot cure dyslexia, even though he says he can. It's not a lack of educational opportunity. So this is where a really good assessment comes into play. If a student is being assessed for dyslexia, the assessor must look into the background to determine if it was a lack of educational opportunity before they can make a diagnosis. And it's not the result of a lack of effort or laziness on the part of the student. And to steal a line from, oh my gosh, I'm completely blanking on his name right now, the Fat City, Rick LaVoy.
Rick LaVoy.
From him, the kids with dyslexia, the kids with learning disabilities, are probably working harder than anybody else in the classroom, and we need to respect that. And what's really unfortunate is then a lot of those kids then have to go somewhere out after school and work another hour with somebody because during school just wasn't giving them what they needed, so they're exhausted. So yes, kids with dyslexia do flip their letters. You do see them say B when it's D, or you do see them spell a B for a D. That does happen. It's entirely normal through the first grade. And the reason that is because when we're born, we have spatial orientation. So if I show you a picture of an elephant and then I turn it around, it's still an elephant. But if now I'm going to give you a B, and then I'm going to turn it around and tell you now it's a completely different grapheme with a completely different phoneme. And then I'm going to switch its spatial orientation again and tell you it's a different grapheme with a different phoneme, and I'm going to do it one more time. So most kids will struggle with that a little bit through the first grade. I know my son did, and he doesn't have any learning disabilities. And I know he struggled with it till about the first month of second grade, and then he got it. But kids with dyslexia, because they struggle with language, will struggle with that concept more, so that may linger after first grade. However, that's only one red flag. That is not what dyslexia is. So we'll continue on and talk about what it actually is. But before we do that, we'll talk about, is it visual processing or dyslexia? So the big difference is that children with dyslexia have trouble processing language rather than visual information. They may enjoy drawing pictures, playing video games, and doing other things that involve interpreting what the eyes see. Children with dyslexia struggle with connecting letters they see to the sounds that are associated with those letters. So I would change that. If it were me writing that, I would say struggle with connecting the graphemes they see to the phonemes that are associated with those graphemes. So the difference is that kids with dyslexia are having trouble processing language. Kids with visual processing issues are having trouble processing all kinds of visual information. So these kids may have a harder time with, like with video games. They may have a hard time drawing pictures. They may have a harder time being, hitting the ball with a bat. Those kinds of things. So that's the difference between visual processing and dyslexia. What's unfortunate is just like vision therapy, visual processing and dyslexia also get misdiagnosed for each other a lot. And so you really need a good expert to determine what. And there's also auditory processing. I'm going to let Tracy explain this one because her son also has this, so she's got some good real-world experience that she could share with you on this one.
Okay, so with auditory processing and dyslexia, there are symptoms that overlap. There are symptoms that you would see in auditory processing and symptoms that would be similar in dyslexia, but each one of them will also have symptoms that are unique to them. So there'll be symptoms in auditory processing that wouldn't be in dyslexia and vice versa. So auditory processing, if they have only auditory processing, you're not going to see it in their print. It's not going to be, they're not going to be challenged with decoding and encoding words. But they may have hard time with the processing of oral language. Like if you give them multi-step directions, if you give them 2 or 3 step directions, you're lucky if they remember the first thing you told them to go do and complete. Or they may have a symptom that will overlap between the two is one where you'll give them a new polysyllabic word, And people with central auditory processing disorder may have a difficult time repeating that word or being able to remember it. Kelly, just so you know, we see you flipping through the slides. People with central processing disorder will have that, may have that difficulty, and that there's no like absolute with any symptom for covering everything, whether it's central auditory processing disorder or dyslexia. But with that, they may have a difficult time reproducing those polysyllabic words. They may know what the word is, but reproducing it accurately may be difficult. For example, I was working with an adult who had dyslexia, not central auditory processing disorder, because this is a symptom that you can see in both, where they'll have a difficult time with those polysyllabic words. He had dyslexia, and we were talking about the Declaration of Independence. He completely understood what the Declaration of Independence is and what its purpose was. He could explain all that, but saying Declaration of Independence was very difficult for him to spit that all out while we were working on it. So he had a difficult time with those polysyllabic words. Another symptom that may overlap between the two is they may confuse words that are similar, that have similar phonemes in them. So for example, this same adult that I worked with, and I see this with young students that I work with, we were working on the word with figuring out to decode the word SIP. So we were working with letter cards, and it was, I had the letter cards SIP in front of him, and he was trying to blend it together, and he said SIP, and he got to the word SIP, and I go, can you use it in a sentence? He goes, like, zip up my coat. And I'm like, oh, that's the word zip. And I showed him the difference between SIP and zip with the letter cards. And he goes, oh my gosh, my whole life I thought they were the same word. He goes, because, you know, in English, we have words that have, you know, different meanings. And so I figured it's possible, why not? And so they can have that kind of difficulty. A symptom that you'll see with auditory processing that would be more unique to auditory processing is they may have difficulty drowning out background noise. Their brain is often processing all the noise equally, where people without that difficulty will hear the noises, but we can focus on the primary thing, like the teacher speaking or the presenter speaking, or if we're trying to, you know, listen to a TV show, you can drown out the background noise that's happening. Their brain may have a very difficult time blocking out that background noise. So there are some symptoms that overlap. There's others that are very unique to each one. Where you're seeing it affect printed language, there's where you're looking at dyslexia more than the auditory processing disorder. So if you have questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat box.
Thank you. Okay, so what is dyslexia? It's a specific, you know, that's like an above, that should be a capital A, and I'm not sure why that's not a capital right there. A specific learning disability that's neurological in origin. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So if I could like, I could say poor spelling, poor spelling, poor spelling, poor spelling. Something wrong with my
capital because it starts with dyslexia is.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. These difficulties typically result from the deficit in the phonological component of the language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities in the provision of effective classroom instruction. So again, if I could have something light up and sparkle and turn around, it would be the word unexpected. So this is the kid who's, you know, like we said earlier, he's 0 to 5, he's fine, he's great, he's building things, he's socially appropriate, he's good at conversation, he has a great vocabulary. But all of a sudden you put language in front of him and he runs. So, you know, you can see this in really young children. I have an example of a student that you're going to see read a little bit later, and he is the same age as my son, so they would be out in the waiting room, and my son would bring out a book, and Griffin would run and hide under a chair. And he was in kindergarten, and we were already looking at him because his older brother was the reason he was there. His older brother was a student of mine, so we knew that, you know, he was at high risk for having dyslexia. And, you know, that was one way it manifested in him, is he just wanted to have nothing to do with the written language, even as young as 4. So but he's such a fabulous kid and all of it, like you would never know it. It's not like you would expect him to have an issue with learning. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. I would like to change this to can impede growth of like academic vocabulary or reading vocabulary. Obviously, this isn't my definition, but the students I work with have amazing verbal vocabulary, and they can, you know, talk me out of a lesson and get me off track in a heartbeat. The 3 students I have right now are all in middle school and high school, so they're really good at that, but their vocabulary is amazing. And because I do structured word inquiry with them, I capitalize on that vocabulary. But I think what they mean in this definition is that academic vocabulary that you get from reading. Basic psychological processes that underlie dyslexia can be, but is not all of these in every student. So our students with dyslexia all look different. We could never give you a blank statement on what a student with dyslexia looks like because we've worked with many, 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 many people with dyslexia. Not one of them presents the same way, presents the same symptoms, or has the same reading profile at all. But here are some things that can be affected. The phonological processing can be affected, orthographic processing, rapid naming, processing speed, and working memory. The other thing I want to say to get profound, so that's another reason that people with dyslexia look a little bit different. You have people on the mild side who maybe just don't like reading, or they're slow readers, and maybe their spelling is a little off. And then you have my students who are way over on the profound side who are having trouble just lifting the word off the page. And then the other thing I was going to say completely slipped my mind while I was talking about that. Oh, that's the other thing, is that I rarely, if ever, had a student who just has dyslexia. They almost always, have some, attention issues, executive function struggles. Working memory is a really big one, and I would say phonological working memory is a really big struggle for most of my students, as well as processing speed. I just assessed a student a couple months ago, and I was asking him what he liked about his teacher. And he literally looked at me for like 30 seconds, and I knew just to let him think. So I just sat there, and his mom was kind of looking at me funny, but I just sat there and let him think. And then eventually he gave me the answer, but it was really interesting because I'm like, he needed that time to think about what he was going to say. And then when he said it, it was beautiful. But I think what happens when we're in a classroom, and Tracy's going to talk about this more later, is when we're in a classroom, we are asking them to think rather quickly and give answers very, very quickly. And so as teachers and parents and tutors and whoever we are, we need to remember to teach them as well as ourselves to allow for that time for them to think instead of just teaching them to blurt out answers as quickly as possible. So here is a picture of 9 different brains. And the reason I show you this picture of 9 different brains, oh, Christina, you asked me to repeat my last statement, and I don't know when you typed that. Okay, there we go. So there's 9 different brains, and the reason I show this is because, we all learn differently. We all have different interests. We all have different strengths. We all have different weaknesses, and especially with people who are having struggles with reading and spelling, we need to meet them where they are. So to teach everybody the exact same way with the same words and the same structure and the same, lesson every single time is kind of really defeating the purpose. And, for like 85% of the population, they're going to be fine and they're going to learn no matter how you teach them. But we still have 15% of the population that needs you to meet them where they are and teach them how the language really works. Having said that, I think 100% of our students should be taught how the language is really put together, but we will talk about that a little bit later in our presentation. We are born to speak, but we are not born to read. The brain has evolved to allow humans to learn to read, but it does not happen naturally because reading is man-made. It has to be explicitly taught. It has to be taught systematically. So I would actually change this word these days, maybe to taught with structure. It has to be taught in a way that a student begins to understand what questions they need to ask themselves while they're reading in order to get to the right answer. Explicitly was right here. It has to be consistent. So to have an intervention once a month isn't going to do anybody any good. And this summer has been really challenging for me and Tracy. We've been traveling a lot for work this summer. So I'm starting to feel really, concerned about the students that I have because we've been extremely inconsistent. And so I can't really expect any kind of serious progress to happen when they're on vacation and when I'm on vacation. So it has to be something that's happening at least twice a week. And if it's one-on-one twice a week for at least an hour. In a classroom, it should be every day for, however long you have set aside for that intervention. It requires a lot of practice to develop.
So can I just pop in and say something about that consistently? Because we often have people ask us how long will it take, and I tell them, you know, it'll take, you know, the average student is 2 to 3 years, coming at minimum twice a week. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of time. I go, but when you compare that to what's happening in school, you're going to school in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, you're learning to read, and they are having instruction, direct instruction and learning to read 5 days a week for the entire school year, at least at minimum an hour a day in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, because that's their primary focus, especially in kindergarten, first grade, is learning to read. So if you compare that to twice a week over a year or 2 or 3, depending upon the number of hours with effective instruction is so minimal compared to what they're doing 5 days a week in a classroom getting instruction that does not fit their way they're learning. Because they get a lot more hours that way and not learning to read, and with a lot less hours, it is more, with the appropriate intervention, is much more effective. Sorry about that, Colin.
That's okay. Okay, let us know if you have any questions too. You feel free to put your questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hand if you don't want to type. On the lower left, you see where it says participants, where your name is listed. If you look down to the left, there's a little hand, and you can click on that hand, and we can unmute you, and you can ask your questions. We have saved some time at the end for you to ask your questions if you want to save it till then. It's completely up to you. Okay, and so when I was, before Tracy popped in, I was talking about how to develop fluency. That developing fluency takes a long time. But I'm going to be really honest and tell you that I really don't care how fast they can read. So fluency is a really big push in a lot of schools, and I think it's because it's easy to implement. You can do read naturally on a computer. You can put a kid on a saying fluency is not important, and I'm not saying that fluency isn't something we should strive for, but I don't want it to be the ultimate goal of reading. What I want the ultimate goal of reading to be is for a child to, or an adult, or whoever it is, to understand what they're reading, to gain comprehension of what they're reading, and to understand their own writing system. That, to me, is far more important than how many words per minute they can read. And again, I really put emphasis on that because I see IEPs that have fluency, 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 and all they're working on is fluency, but they're missing the whole point that in order to even get to fluency, you have to figure out what's going on underneath. How are these words put together? What do they mean? How do I gain meaning from this? And then all I'm doing is trying to read really fast. Sometimes you're really just teaching them to bark at the letters, bark at the words, where they're just announcing all the words, but they have no idea what they're really reading. And we do that in one of the simulations that we do. We have them read out loud, and then I ask them what they read afterwards, and half of them have no idea. Even if they don't have the messed up version, they still aren't getting any comprehension from what they're reading because they're just barking at the words. Okay, so learning in the brain. So a lot of you probably know, what plasticity is. That's the ability of the brain to change with learning. Plasticity, I'm having a hard time talking today. Plasticity is a lifelong ability of the brain to reorganize neural pathways based on new experiences. So students with dyslexia don't have something that, they don't have a brain that's broken or dysfunctional, but their reading pathway is different than those of somebody who doesn't have dyslexia. So when they get an intervention that's multisensory, that's structured, that's consistent, that's talking about phonemes and graphemes and morphemes and all these great things, then they start to restructure and reorganize the neural pathways of their brain so that when they do start to read, it's more efficient. Because we just want them to be more efficient so it's not so hard. We're not trying to change their brain or change how they think or any of their innate gifts that you may think they have. We just want them to be more efficient so that they can gain that comprehension from their reading. And then repetition is really vital. We need to, just like you go to the gym, and if you go to the gym and you work out once and you lift weights, you leave with the bicep after one session, you don't. You have to just keep going at it over and over and over again. So, the brain is a muscle, so you have to kind of repeat the same thing over and over and over again until they commit it to memory, and that's why repetition is so important in intervention. And I'm just going to answer Carol. I know Tracy's going, yes. But as I said earlier, Tracy and I worked in adult literacy for many, many, many years before we switched over. And founded the Dyslexia Training Institute, and all of our adults were like 40 and over. So they had that those 20s and 30s where I think they were kind of ignoring it or they were getting along fine. And then I think their kids started getting a little older in their 40s or whatever happened, or they couldn't get, ahead in their job, and they would come to the adult literacy program. And yes, you can still read. The only hitch is that it happens a little slower. So here are some brain images of students with dyslexia or people with dyslexia. On the left-hand side here, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor? Okay, good. So on the left-hand side here, you have your readers, excuse me, and they're reading words in isolation. So this is not one brain. This is a compilation of brains put together and averaged out. And so what's happening here is they're putting an fMRI machine and it's measuring the blood flow of the brain during a specific activity. So am I still cutting out? Are you guys still able to hear and see me pretty well?
You're good. You're good right at the moment. So maybe just start at the what that first one about the typical readers. Yeah, like that very beginning part when you were talking about the typical reader brain was pretty much cut out. So just repeat that.
My apologies. So right here are the typical readers. This is not one brain. This is a group of typical readers who were, excuse me, all put into an fMRI, and their blood flow was measured during a specific activity, and it was averaged out to superimpose onto this picture. And then on the right-hand side, the exact same thing for students with dyslexia. So what they were doing is they were reading words in isolation, which is a little dicey because reading words in isolation is a little dicey if you think about what reading actually is. But the purpose of this study was to determine how well they were able to use those quote-unquote decoding skills for a word out of context. And so you can clearly see here that students with dyslexia have this kind of reading pathway, is what they call it. I have something in my throat. This reading pathway. And then students with dyslexia, are a little bit more inhibited right here. What you don't see is what I'll show you on the next slide. This is the left side of the brain. Is that on the right side of the brain, they're actually overutilizing the right side of the brain. So it's not as if nothing's going on here. It's just being processed in a different part of the brain, which is really actually quite fascinating. So here's an MEG that illustrates that point. So at the top, you have dyslexic readers. At the bottom, you have non-dyslexic readers. You see here the difference in where they're processing the information. So the left-hand side of the brain is where we process language, and the right-hand side of the brain is where we process spatial orientation. So you can see quite clearly the difference in how they're processing the information. So they are both processing information the same amount, it looks like, just in different ways. This is a little bit more inefficient when it comes to reading and spelling. But this is really interesting because this is, the spatial orientation area of the brain. And a lot of people take this as a sign or as evidence that people with dyslexia are more spatially inclined, they're more artistic, they're more this and that. They're really, I will say most of my students love to build things. I don't know if that's because they're more spatially inclined or because reading has forced them into something different. I don't really know, what the answer is there, but I will tell you that they're definitely much more into Legos than my son is. And I think, maybe there is something to that, but I think that more research needs to be done there. So this research provides evidence that dyslexia is neurobiological. We would never say that this research provides proof because it's pretty hard to prove what the brain is doing at this point in the world. Dyslexia is very genetic, so if you have there's a 50% chance that siblings will have dyslexia if another one does. Parents often have dyslexia and don't realize it until they see their kids struggle, especially parents like my age because they didn't really diagnose it when I was in high school. I'm not going to tell you what my age is, but parents my age tend to not really understand their own dyslexia until they see their kids struggle. But the parents could also have more mild dyslexia, and the child has more severe dyslexia, which goes back to the continuum, but it definitely runs in families. It doesn't have to run in families, but there's usually a family or an aunt or an uncle or a nephew or a niece or somebody else in the family who's struggling. And then that becomes more complicated. We have a lot of students who are adopted or they were conceived by a sperm donor and things like that happen. So you can't determine it all with a lot of support. Okay, lifelong condition. Sorry, I was reading the comments. It's a lifelong condition, so 74% of poor readers in 3rd grade remain poor readers in the 9th grade. So this is the slide that really gets me, because we still hear our school won't test until 3rd grade, or we can't do anything until 3rd grade. That's absurd. It's not supported by IDEA. It's another like wives' tale or administrator's tale. It's absurd because if you wait until the 3rd grade, you have now allowed that child to fail for 4 years before you've done anything about it. And that's not okay, because now we're going to start talking about social issues, emotional issues, anxiety issues, and on top of that, in 4th grade, they don't really teach reading anymore. In 4th grade, they're now they're reading to learn versus learning to read. And so it just doesn't make any sense. We now have the capability to screen and identify students who are at a high probability of having dyslexia. You don't even have to diagnose them. You can identify kids who have characteristics of dyslexia in kindergarten, get them the appropriate intervention in kindergarten, and yes, you can say things like phoneme to a kindergartner. You can say things like morpheme to a kindergartner, and you get them the intervention in kindergarten. They get 2 to 3 years max of the appropriate intervention in the school setting, and then they move on with their life and never have to be in special education again. And so that's what should be happening. And to wait until 3rd grade is just, it's a travesty. And you have to think about the emotional well-being of the student at that point as well. It's not okay to wait until 3rd grade. So we know there's a national speaker, famous dyslexia researcher, who calls this the WTF model. So she's referring to RTI, which is response to intervention. So if you don't know what response to intervention is, it's a way that it has good intentions. So response to intervention is that if you see a student who's struggling, you will give them the intervention, level 1 intervention or tier 1 intervention. If they don't do well in tier 1 intervention, you put them in tier 2 intervention. If they don't do well in tier 2 intervention, you put them in tier 3 intervention. I think at that point in some schools, that's when they get referred to special education. But there's no real regulation about how long those tiers last, or what's going on there, or what interventions they're using, or what progress is being monitored. And so she calls that the WTF model, which doesn't mean what you think it means, but it's hilarious, which means wait to fail. So we're waiting for them to fail, and it makes absolutely no sense when we're talking about dyslexia. It should not be happening. What is tiered intervention? Because you're in Trinidad, you guys probably don't have this. It just means that they'll start off with like a really simple intervention to begin with, and then the second tier is a little bit more structured, and the 3rd tier is really structured, and then the 3rd or 4th tier might be like a pull out to another classroom. I'm not sure what they would call that in Trinidad. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Tracy.
Okay, can you make me presenter so I can do the slides, or you can click them, I don't care. Oh, you know what, you're sharing your desktop. You'll have to keep clicking them. I can't control it. I forgot about that. Okay, so we're going to start talking about identifying dyslexia. So dyslexia, Sally Shaywitz has a great quote, and if you don't know who Sally Shaywitz is, her and her spouse, Bennett, are out of Yale at the Dyslexia Center for Creativity and Dyslexia or something. I forget what the actual title is, but they've been studying dyslexia for a long time. She is the author of the well-known book Overcoming Dyslexia that was published in 2003 or 2005, and it's a good book for parents to read, but it is getting a little dated, because we've had a lot of research that's happened since it was first published, 2001, sorry, when it was first published. And so obviously we've learned more about what's happening for people with dyslexia since 2001, because that was already 15 years ago, for goodness sakes. And so, but her book is still, the research that they did, nothing has said that wasn't good research, it's just that we've learned more. And she wrote it for parents and educators. It's not too researchy, for lack of a better word. It's not as intense as reading like Stanislaus Dehaene's book that Kelly was talking about earlier, Reading in the Brain. So if you're looking for a easier book to read, that one is still a good book to go to. Or you can always look at Stanislaus Dehaene's book, just look at the dyslexia chapter. There's a new book, Reading at the Speed of Sight, I believe is the title of it, and Kelly, I'm sure, will type it up in the chat box for us. It's a really new book, and it's very good, but also not as easy of a read as Sally's book, but still a very understandable and good book to look at. But she has this famous quote, "Dyslexia is a weakness in a sea of strengths." And so people with it, just like people without dyslexia, we have areas of strengths and areas of weakness, things we're really good at and others that we kind of struggle in. Unfortunately, when you're struggling with language, with print-based language, it greatly impacts your functionality in the United States and many other very literate countries. So if we were not so reliant on the printed word, it wouldn't be as big of an impact on an individual. But because we are a very print-rich environment for work and everyday life, it really does impact our abilities to be functional when you have that weakness. Can you click up? So we're going to start talking about how it affects an individual, how it may affect an individual. Kelly already stated this earlier, that every individual with dyslexia is not going to look exactly the same. They're going to have their own set of symptoms. They're going to range, each symptom will be from mild, moderate, severe to profound. Not anybody with dyslexia is going to have all the symptoms. They have to have more than one of the symptoms, and their set of symptoms, like they could have a bunch of symptoms and they all be mild to moderate, and especially if they have they're gifted, have a higher IQ, but even an average IQ, they may be able to compensate well, especially in the beginning grades, and it's going to catch up with them later. When they get into that more moderate to severe to profound, that's where you're going to start seeing it, much younger and it really impacting them a great deal. So the first set of symptoms we're going to look at are those types of symptoms that affect being able to accurately and or fluently recognize words in print on the page. So some things that are these are common symptoms. Some of these are common symptoms, some not so common. Like difficulty remembering the names and or shapes of letters is not a super common symptom. It can be a symptom, but it's not super common. They usually can recall the shape and the names of the letters, or they may just struggle with one or two. Now, don't confuse this with that directionality thing Kelly was talking about earlier with knowing whether it's a B or D or P or Q. That has to do with the brain having that difficulty with orientation issues and unlearning that orientation matters. Difficulty learning the phoneme options for graphing options. As Kelly stated earlier, phonemes are the sounds that we associate with our graphemes. We use letters of the alphabet to produce our graphemes. Some of our graphemes are one letter, some are two letters, some are three letters. So, T would be a one-letter grapheme. We use the letters TH for the grapheme TH. So there's an example of a two-letter grapheme. We have three-letter graphemes, and so we use graphemes to spell our words, and our phonemes represent our graphemes, and our graphemes represent our phonemes. They may have sequence, and they may have difficulty, and that one of the challenges also is that we often teach that there's a one-to-one correspondence, and that's not true. Our graphemes can have more than one phoneme option, and our phonemes can have more than one grapheme option. So we have to get better at teaching those options for students. And Kelly posted a great three-letter grapheme UGH, like in the word laugh. Okay, they may have sequencing issues, reversing or transposing letters when reading, and also with spelling after the first grade. They may have difficulty with sequencing, not just with print, but other sequencing issues, but definitely with print, they have a difficult time putting those sounds in the orders that they are. They misread or omit common small words, the function words, the us, buts, at, the, that's because they have a difficult time with conceptualizing those words. They don't really carry a lot of meaning by themselves, because you could say, I went to a store and I went to the store, and it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence a whole lot. And if I give you words like and the and of, there's nothing that you can have a visual representation for. So if I give you words like run and green and fast and car and pencil, you get visual representations that carry meaning where those other function words are very difficult. I will say this is a really common symptom, and one that's one of the harder ones to work on for the students. It's one that persists even with appropriate remediation. They will get better at it, but it is one of the harder ones for them because of the challenge with those function words. They stumble through longer words because they're struggling with the decoding of those words. They can't quickly and effectively match grapheme and phonemes, recognize patterns. The next one is difficulty recognizing patterns with language. They may pick up patterns outside of language, but when we're talking about language, they have a difficult time picking up patterns. People without dyslexia, they don't explicitly teach us rules for patterns. Our brain naturally picks up patterns, and we apply it to new words relatively easy because our brain has picked up a pattern. Their brain does not easily pick up patterns with language. Can you flick the slide for me, Cal? Thank you. So we were talking a little bit about what a phoneme is. So the phoneme is the smallest unit of language that distinguishes meaning. So if we have cat and we change that beginning k to a p, we now have pat, which completely changed the meaning of the word. So it's that those individual sounds. And so the phoneme, which comes from the noun phonetics, is any perceptually distinct unit of sound in a specified language that distinguishes one word from another, and this does have to do somewhat with dialect as well. So if you look at the example that with the cat to pat or pad or bad, each time we change those, we're changing one phoneme and it's changing the word. And I love this quote from Gina Cook: if something is spelled with a single grapheme in an alphabetic writing system, it is a single phoneme. So the individual graphemes represent individual phonemes. But again, one grapheme can have more than one phonemic representation, and vice versa. One phoneme can have more than one graphemic representation. And we're going to explain a little bit more about that in a future slide. Difficulty with distinguishing and manipulating sounds. Phonemic awareness is all at the auditory level. There are no letters. When you're doing a phonemic awareness, there are no letters. We only use oral manipulation when we're doing this. So being able to segment, being able to take, if I gave the word stop, can they segment it into stop? Or being able, and counting how many of those phonemes do you have, or deleting. If we have stop and I ask you to take off the what you have left, or substituting. So now we have top. I want you to take off the and put on what you have now. Now you have mop. Or they may be able to substitute that beginning one, but maybe not that ending one. So if we have mop, and I want you to take off the and put on what do you have now? You have mod. What if I ask you to take off the and put an what do you have now? Mad. They may be able to do the beginning one, they may be able to do the ending one, but not the middle one. Of course, the most difficult is the middle substitutions. The easiest often are the beginning or the ending one, and it differs from student to student. Not every student with dyslexia has phonemic awareness issues either. Being able to do phonemic matching. Do cat and cap begin with the same sound? Do they end with the same sound? Do they have the same middle sound? Or being able to blend. So if I give you like, can you blend those together to get to like? And so you have, depending upon the individual student, this phonemic awareness stuff greatly impacts reading and spelling. Again, although when we're doing phonemic awareness, we're not talking about printed letters, we're just doing it all at the auditory level, but you can see how not being able to do those things can really affect the ability to manipulate language in print as well. And Kelly answered that question, it looks like. Okay, phonological awareness. So this is that not being able to pick up patterns. They may not be able to do that rhyming like at, bat, cat, bat, sat, hat, and we give you another rhyme that goes with it. They may be able to do it. They may completely understand what rhyming is, but you give them a rhyme at an auditory level and they may not be able to pick it up. Now, of course, if you write it down, they see the pattern, but if you're doing it all at an auditory level, they may not pick up that pattern. And I did this with an adult student who understood what rhyming was, and I did this rhyme, and when I got to his turn to give me a rhyme, I gave him a list of words and gave him the chance to respond. He said time. And he goes, did I get it right? And I'm like, well, you picked up that last phoneme, so he picked up a phoneme from it, because sometimes you just make up anything and think he's following the pattern. And he really understood what rhyming was, and he wanted to learn to rhyme for some reason. But eventually he got a little bit better at it, but it was very difficult for him. He was severely, severely dyslexic. Or being able to hear those spoken syllables in words. So if we say the word like fantastic, can they hear that fantastic? Can they hear those 3 beats we hear, those syllables, spoken syllables in language? They may or may not be able to do that very well. Can you click the slide? Okay, in the slide. It may also affect poor spelling, having orthographic awareness, and we're going to be talking about that. I will say I have never, ever, and Kelly will tell you the same thing, met a student with dyslexia that it does not affect their spelling. It always affects their dyslexia, always affects their spelling. If they're not struggling with the spelling, they're most likely they're not struggling with reading and they don't have dyslexia. So this one is a key one. Now we'll have students that can read fairly well and keep up with grade level content or whatever they need to do in life, but it's really just affecting their writing. So not all people with dyslexia are going to be struggling with the reading per se. They may be struggling with the writing, or even with they may be able to read, but because they have dyslexia, they fatigue much easier. So like with my son, he's reading on grade level. He's 6th grade and reading on grade level. But he still, because of his dyslexia, gets fatigued with when he's reading with the volume of reading and the time frame required. He cannot keep up with that, so he still has to have his accommodations. But it definitely affects his spelling, and we still continue to work on that because it's the area that definitely gives them the most challenge, and it's true for all people with dyslexia. It's going to affect their spelling. So here are some of the symptoms. Again, they may not have all the symptoms. And the symptoms can be from mild, moderate, severe to profound, and it's why 2 people with dyslexia won't look exactly alike. Reverses the letters or orders of letters when writing after the 1st grade. They spell phonologically, so they're the ones that write, and you can figure out what they're trying to say because what they're doing is picking the most common grapheme for the phoneme that they hear, but they're also not applying spelling conventions. So they may spell like L-I-K, but they don't put the final E on there, because they're not, they aren't providing the orthographic conventions of language when they're writing. But you can pretty much figure it out for the most part what they're trying to write. They may have beginning and ending sounds accurate, but misspell those beginning, not being able, that goes back to that phonemic awareness, not being able to isolate those individual phonemes in the middle. They can get maybe the beginning and ending, but those middle ones, they have a hard time segmenting, and so it really is reflective in their spelling. Does not understand the orthography of the language. They don't pick up those patterns of prefixes and suffixes and looking for the base, or pick up that pattern that when we have a word like the word like, L-I-K-E, knowing that that final E will make the previous vowel long and not applying those conventions. May not use words they would in oral language. So one of the things that teachers always have students do at the first day of school or the first week of school is write about what they did over the summer. And the student may say, they may be telling you about what they did. They went, my family and I went on an amazing vacation this summer to the Grand Canyon. It was immense and beautiful. But what ends up on paper is, I went on a trip, it was fun, we went to the Grand Canyon, which is probably misspelled, it was big. Because they don't think they can spell immense, they don't think they can spell beautiful, they don't think they can spell amazing. So they pick the smallest possible words, and often their sentences become disjointed because they're thinking so hard about spelling and the conventions of writing that they lose their thought process, which will lead to either short, choppy sentences or complete run-on sentences, or disorganization of their writing. It feels like they're kind of all over the place while they're writing. A lot of it is they're like writing a sentence and they forget what it is. They go back and try to read it from the beginning and try to finish it, and it's so much more work. Kelly was showing you what reading looks like in the brain. Writing is even more complex in the brain than reading is. So it's really difficult. So it can lead to that they don't use proper grammar or punctuation and capitalization. Rarely is their writing a true reflection of their thought process or their intellectual ability. And Kelly, the last bullet I can't see. Can you tell me what it is?
Yes, it says may or may also have dysgraphia.
Oh, and that's a good one. So can you go to the next slide? Because I believe, does that show? see. So dysgraphia is the lack of ability with writing, and a lot of times it's diagnosed by looking at the way that they actually form letters or how they're able to write on a line. Here's an example of somebody who's struggling with writing a great deal. This is, his name's Roberto. He's English speaking, grew up here in the United States. His parents are English speaking. He's Hispanic by heritage. So this is not a second language issue at all. You can see he still struggles with which way does the J go. This is the end of 3rd grade. He's still struggling with which way does the J go. You can see he's having a hard time writing in a straight line the alphabet, but even once he has lines, staying on the line, doing consistent spacing between his words, the formation of his letters. Here's somebody who has orthographic dyslexia. It did affect his reading to some degree, but not very much. It mostly affected his writing. And here you can read his sentence. Yesterday, I went to soccer practice. It was really fun. We won the scrimmage. You can figure out what he's trying to say because he's writing very phonologically, very phonologically. And so he's matching what he knows is the best grapheme to phoneme. And that first word, yesterday, is a great example. Like he doesn't understand the orthography that yesterday is all one word. He made it 2 different words. And then you can see he did some spelling. How, strong, able, everyone, uncle, new, brandish, 19, expect, sure, and enough. He can apply understanding of some grapheme phoneme options. Like you can look at sure, number 24, and he used SH at the beginning because he knows that the most common representation of sh in our language is SH. But he doesn't understand that sometimes it's just the S. And when does that apply? And you can see some of those other ones. He spelled brandish correctly, but that one you can sound out and have those most common graphemes match, and it worked pretty well. But look at able, like he forgot his final E on able. And why do we have to have that? He doesn't understand the orthographic convention that every syllable in our language must have a vowel represented, and that's what that E is doing there. And so you can see he's really struggling with the orthography of the language. Obviously, it can affect reading comprehension difficulties, but as I've stated, not always. And they always, I shouldn't say always, almost always need more time to process new information. They have the ability to process information when they're taught explicitly with the way they need to learn, but they also may need more time to process new information, especially if they have the rapid naming issue where they have a difficult time quickly and accurately pulling the information they know in an effective manner. So they have the ability to process, but they need more time. Unfortunately, in our culture, we're a very fast-paced culture, and when we move along pretty quickly, and teachers only have a certain amount of time to cover certain material, and we're moving pretty quickly. But also, when we're asking them questions, when we ask a question, they know they're supposed to give a response. And when are they supposed to give a response? Right away. And when we don't get a response right away, what do? We start giving them more information to process. We start talking. We either give the answer, or we start giving them more information to process, and they're already trying to process the information they have. These are the kids that we train them unintentionally to just spit out things that give an answer, even if it's not the right answer. So we'll ask a question, and they'll spit out a response, and it's like, you're completely guessing, or you're not paying attention. These are the kids get accused of not paying attention in school or not applying themselves. And really, if they were given the time to think through that question and give a response, they would give an appropriate response. But we don't give them their thinking time. I will say this is one of the hardest things I have to do when I first start working with a student is train them to give themselves permission to think, because they're so used to just having to spit out. And so when they give me an answer, I'll be like, oh, did you use your thinking time? And because I can tell when they have and haven't, and they're like, oh, not really. And I go, would you like me to repeat the question? And I'll repeat the question and give them their thinking time. And 9 times out of 10, they come up with the right answer when they use their thinking time. We need to give them their thinking time. They have the ability to figure it out. They're not intellectually challenged. They have the ability to figure it out. We have to give them their thinking time. And this we put on its own slide because it is so important. As we're working with them, we need to give them their thinking time. Okay, so here's an example of a student that is in kindergarten. He's struggling with the language. Usually we don't let students struggle this much, we're going to play it in just a moment. We let him struggle a little bit more. Our staff member, Brittany, actually works with this student, and he's the brother of his older brother came to our center as well, and so there's a family history of dyslexia. And this is a great example of showing how he doesn't pick up patterns. And so as you see it, you're going to see him, I'll let you watch it and then we'll talk about it. So go ahead and play it, Kel, thanks. We're not hearing it. You're on, Kelly, are you on mute? We're not hearing it.
Okay, sorry.
Can play. Fine. Dogs. Run in the shadows. Keep going. Do pez. Keep going. Help. Have. Of. You.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, so you can see he struggled saying cats play but he read in the sun. He read in the sun, and then the next line where it says in the sun again, he doesn't even recognize sun and says shadow. And he struggled with run, and there's that pattern, S-U-N, R-U-N, S-U-N, F-U-N. He couldn't figure out fun. He said pets, she gave him have, and he said of. So he's not even picking up that pattern that most kids would pick up, that UN is that on, and that a rhyming family, run, fun, sun. He's not picking it up. And he got to, and it didn't even make sense when so you can show, it shows he's not getting comprehension. Do pets have of? And then when he got to yes, he said use. It wasn't quite sure what that word was, and then reads pets like the sun. So you can see this is a great example of a student really struggling with both the how it's impacting his reading, and obviously it would be impacting his spelling a great deal. Do we have time to show this one?
No, I was going to suggest that we skip this.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is an example of another student, but at a higher level. And I will tell you a little bit. Can you just leave it on that slide for a second? One of the things that this student did, I'm sorry, go back to the story. That student did was, it was a good example of a student not paying attention to punctuation. This student only paused at the end of a line, not at the end of punctuation. So they're reading, there are three tiny boys, and it says 3 tiny boys, what is in the small box, PM? Opens the first, so no focus on punctuation. The pauses were on words that they struggled with, and no focus on punctuation at all, and even read things that didn't really make sense. Okay, thanks.
And I was going to add to this one, actually. What was really interesting about this one is he reads it pretty darn accurately. So he reads it accurate. He reads the words accurately. He's not, he doesn't have any kind of prosody, or he's not really checking for comprehension, but he has good decoding skills. So he's a kid that could get missed on just a screener. Like if we were just going to screen him and say, oh, but he's decoding just fine, there's nothing wrong with him. This is where the qualitative information comes in. So if you just look quantitatively at his scores as far as decoding goes, he might look average. But if you take the time to listen to what he's doing, which is the qualitative part, that's where you're going to see all your red flags and find your dyslexia.
Okay. It didn't, oh, there we go. So I referred to this really briefly, double deficit dyslexia. And that is where they will have below average scores in phonological processing. They're going to struggle with the phonological processing of language, but they also have the rapid naming deficit. And that's where the rapid naming is being able to quickly and accurately pull information you know from your brain and use it quickly. So these are students that will talk around things because they can't find the right words, or they misuse words, or they'll pull a common word or a word that has the same meaning but it isn't the right word. And when you think about reading and spelling, what you have to do quickly and accurately is match your understanding of the orthography very quickly, along with pulling the correct phonemes for the correct graphemes when you are reading. So you're looking at the graphemes and you're looking at the orthography and you're quickly looking at that to decode it quickly. And they have if you have that rapid naming deficit, that's very difficult for them to do quickly and accurately. And so they'll have difficulty with manipulating the language and also struggles with retrieval of verbal language. And that's usually considered double deficit. And there's, if you Google Marianne Wolf and double deficit dyslexia, there will be, you'll find an article, which you see also in this hot link at the bottom of this page. So double deficit dyslexia will affect their decoding, it'll affect their fluency, and it may affect their, and it'll affect their comprehension. It can also affect their spelling, and almost always affects their spelling and their composition. But it can also affect their spoken language because they have a difficult time quickly and accurately pulling words that they want, that they have. It's not that they don't have that information in their head, it's they do have that information. And a way to kind of, this isn't an exact simulation of it, but what you could do to see what it's like when you have that information, but it's difficult to retrieve it quickly, is tonight when you brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. Now this is something your brain knows how to do really, really well, so the information's there, but it's just sending it to the other side of your body, so it's just the output issue. And brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand, and you'll realize how much all of a sudden this became a very cognizant activity, and it becomes a little bit cumbersome unless you really can use both sides of your body really, really well, ambidextrous. But most of us would be like, oh, I have to actually think about that, and it's a much more difficult process. That's being able to quickly pull that information, and that's without a deficit. So if you have a deficit, and then that's a difficulty. And so there's a couple of hot links at the bottom of there about double deficit if you're interested in reading some more about that. So phonological processing, this is where they actually have below average scores in phonological processing and phonological memory, but the rapid naming score is okay. They don't have rapid naming issues. And just so you know how they actually assess for that, it's not with language, with printed language. What they do is they'll give them, depending upon their age, like a set, if they're really young and they know their colors, they'll give them a page of blocks that have different colors in a row, many rows of it, and they have to tell them what color it is as quickly as they can. And usually they'll start out okay, and then they'll slow down and maybe misname and may or may not self-correct. But in comparison to their peers, they'll do it at a much slower rate and have less accuracy. So when you have the phonological processing deficit, they may have, so they'll have deficit in phonological processing and phonological memory, but their rapid naming will be not be a difficulty. So that's where they'll have difficulty manipulating the verbal part of language. So identifying the individual phonemes in words, like being able to go k, at, ch for catch, or blending them. If we gave this student sp, in, can they get to spin? Or being able to delete, like if you had cat and I asked you to take off the k, what do you have left? At. Or if you have cat and I ask you to take off that and put on, can they get to cap? They have those types of difficulties. And then orthographic, that's where they're not struggling with the phonological aspect. Their phonological awareness and their phonological memory on this, like as if it were assessed on the C-top, is in the average or above average range, but they still struggle to read. So these are the students that are spelling entirely phonemically or phonologically. And that was the example like with Roberto. He was spelling very phonologically or phonemically. So they're able to spell words like brandish, but they aren't able to spell words like every. They didn't pick up the orthography that every is E-V-E-R plus the suffix Y. Or they'll spell helped, H-E-L-P-T, because they aren't familiar, they don't know that orthography, that ED is the most common representation for past tense. And so they're not applying what, they're not able to apply what they know with the phonology. They're not able to apply that to reading and writing. And they don't understand the orthography. So orthographic dyslexia, they're processing the phonology fine. They don't understand the orthography, and it's very, very reflected in their spelling. And Kelly wrote a great blog post that if you Google Kelly Salmon Hurley and orthography for dyslexia, you're going to get this blog post, or go on our website, on our blog, and you'll be able to find it there. So here's an example. Kel, do you want to talk about these since these are your students?
Sure. So this is my student chat. This was a couple months ago. It's really interesting. This is a student I was telling you who needed all that time to process the information about what he likes about his teacher. So I'm going to read this to you. I have to move my screens out of the way. I went to we live in San Diego, so I went to the Padres, so P-R-O-G-A-S, right here, this is Padres game. It was fun. The Padres lost, but they tried, oh gosh, I remember what it was, their best. They tried to do their best. I'm not sure what this word is right here. But this is a third grader. This is a third grader with no IQ issues. And barely got an IEP at his public school. So, you know, it's fairly troubling to me. He is relying almost completely on sounded out. So we at the Dyslexia Training Institute know that you cannot rely on sounded out to teach spelling and or reading. He needs to think about what these words mean first before he can really understand how they are spelled. What's really concerning, though, is that when he sounded it out, he came up with this. That's concerning, and I would actually, on that one, even possibly suggest that he see a speech and language therapist for an assessment, just in case. And then, as Tracy said, he didn't use punctuation either. So he is going, I will say he's going into the third grade. He is the same age as my son, so he is going into the third grade, but this is pretty severe, if you ask me. And then you have sixth grade. This is my sixth grader. She is a girl, and I say that because Tracy and I are very, very guilty of getting a lot of male examples, and we don't mean to. Somehow it just worked out that way. But girls are just as likely as boys to have dyslexia. However, all examples happen to be boys. But this is my girl, this is her bucket list. So she's going into the sixth grade. She has no IQ issues. She wants to graduate college, jump out of a plane, visit Paris, have 100 squishies. She brings a suitcase full of squishies to our sessions, spreads them all out on the desk before we get started. Oh, sorry. That's my Keurig in the back. Be an actor, go to Hollywood, go to a Taylor Swift concert, go to the Wax Museum. I love this because Wax, she sounded it out, and look what it left her with. Wax Museum and drive in a limo. So again, she's also been taught to sound things out. And not to say that phonology doesn't matter, because it matters significantly, but it's not the first thing you can think about when you're teaching spelling, or else you're going to end up with things like this. She actually has really good phonological awareness. She hears all the sounds. She just doesn't know how we represent them in writing, which is what a phoneme is. And then this is my student, Brock. He is going into the 9th grade. All of my students are profound. You can probably guess by their writing samples. Brock is an avid surfer, skimboarder, and so I had him, he was leaving for a week or so to go to Mexico to go surfing, and so I told him I really wanted him to write something while he was there, because I'm trying to get him ready for 9th grade, and I know the writing's going to be significantly more 9th grade. So what he wrote was, today we went over to Fred's, then I caught a crab. Today I went skimboarding and caught a fish. I had too many Cokes today. Too many Cokes, like C-O-K-E-S. I made a surfboard blanket. There was a big shore break. There was a massive stingray. I surfed a small wave. We ate crab for dinner, and I grabbed a stingray. In Brock's defense, when I was reading this, he goes, I don't know why I wrote that. I didn't actually grab a stingray. I'm like, well, that's good, because that wouldn't have been very smart, Brock. We don't want to be grabbing stingrays in the ocean in Mexico. But just a few things to point out is, again, he is relying completely on his sound first, which as his tutor is slightly frustrating to me because I've been working with him for a really long time. He knows that English words never end in V. Where was that? Massive. He knows that. What's interesting about Brock is when he brought it to me, I would go through, I picked a few words to go over. Caught is going to be a tough one, so that one we haven't quite studied yet. But I went to like, well, today is actually 2 words, so we talked about how that's 1 word. And again, he's looking at B's and D's, B's and C's. He does this all the time. This one. So I just said, okay, so say the word that you're trying to say. He said made. I'm like, is that a long vowel or a short vowel? He said, it's long. I'm like, okay, so do we need something in that word to mark that as a long vowel? I don't say it's a magic E or something crazy. I say, is there something there that we need to mark it so that the reader and the speller knows it's a long A? And that's when he knew there needed to be an E there. Then I talked to him about there, because we've talked about there several times. But when I just asked him the questions, he was able to fix it on his own. But he's still not able to really do it on his own. Like I said, if there was a word beyond profound, I would put him there. But he knows it intellectually, which is fine with me, as long as he's understanding it. You know, he can use accommodations to help him with this, but when I asked him the questions, like I said, he was able to remember what the conventions were. The other one, this one, surfed. This one is really interesting because there is not a vowel in this word anywhere. And so he's also, this is how you know he's relying on sound first. So my question to him is, the sentence is, I surfed a small wave. So when did you surf a small wave? And he said, well, it was that morning. I'm like, so it already happened. And he's like, yes. I'm like, how do we represent, what is one way, actually, I changed it. What is one way we can represent the past tense in spelling? He's like, oh, ED. I'm like, right, no matter what you hear, doesn't matter what you hear, and how we represent that in spelling matters. So he was able to get there, but this is just a good example of orthographic dyslexia, what it looks like when you actually do have pretty good phonological processing, as evidenced by the fact that all the sounds are represented. He just doesn't understand how to represent them in writing and spelling.
Yeah, this is like such a fabulous example. Like a lot of the conventions that Kelly was pointing out, like he didn't have any vowel in either spelling us because he had surf. You know, I made a surfboard blanket. He didn't have a vowel in the surf there, and then he didn't have a vowel. He didn't have not by 9th grade. Not knowing today is one word. Not picking up that pattern is really a great representation that he's not understanding the orthography. He still has a lowercase f on Fred's. Like this, all of that kind of stuff is a great, these are great and all the things Kelly pointed out are great representations of not understanding the orthography and the conventions of writing, and not picking that up, not even just picking it up through repetition, which is a way lots of students pick it up, but also, like Kelly said, I would also add that a lot of times, because I have the same thing with my students, is this will be what they show me, and then I'll go start asking them questions, and they can fix it. Our kids hate to do editing. It's so much work to get it on the paper the first time. To go back and edit it is like, oh my gosh. And the writing is so complex in the brain, and they're struggling so much with that, doing that phoning, graphing, matching, and trying to do what they can with it, that being able to apply all the information they actually do know is really difficult, and that's where the editing comes in. But they hate to edit, man. It's like, they're like, are you kidding me? This is so much work to get it on the paper the first time. And it's like, it's part of the natural writing process. That's what we all do. We write and then we edit, and they're like, oh, I don't care. It was so much work to get it done the first time. They're done. They're wiped out.
I just want to add one more thing to this. When you're looking to see if a student has dyslexia and you're looking at assessments, all you really need to do is look at their writing sample. I don't look at the scores. I'm like, that's fine. That was a moment in time on a test that may or may not have been given correctly by a curriculum developer that may or may not understand how English actually works. So I want to know, what are they producing? And when I look at this writing sample and I look at the other two writing samples, I know exactly what I need to do with that student. You don't need anything else but their writing sample to really understand what it is you need to do for that student.
Okay, and then it brings us to our twice exceptional child. That's a student that is gifted, meaning they have above average IQ and a learning disability. So they have above average IQ and they have a learning disability. These are the students that we can see that are taking an inordinate amount of time to complete their classwork or their homework. Like it takes them way more time than it should, especially compared to their peers. They have really high vocabulary and spoken skills, but it's not reflected in their written compositions. These are the students that often aren't identified until like middle school or high school or even at all because they develop compensatory strategies. A lot of times when we talk to adults who have kids with dyslexia, they'll be like, yeah, I struggled that way, but they're also gifted, but I managed to do this, this, and this. Like they develop really good compensatory strategies, but they're still struggling. And they're struggling often a great deal. I was an advocate for a student that was third in her class. She was third in her class, but we actually got her a 504 because she was in high school at this point. She was and their parents just wanted her to be able to have accommodations because she would literally get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, study till she went to school all day, and would study all night until 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and then get up the next day and do that Monday through Friday, and studied all weekend long just to be third in her class because she was working so darn hard compared to her peers to complete everything. But she was intellectually capable. I mean, she was third in her class. And so we got her the appropriate accommodations. We worked hard to get her the appropriate accommodations. And because she really wanted to be on the track team, the cross-country team. And her parents wanted her to, at least on the weekends, at least once or twice a month, go out with her friends and have a life. And so we fought to get her accommodation so that she could have a life. And that did happen. Okay. So we talked a little bit about dysgraphia already. I think the next couple slides will show some. So these are my son's, a couple pictures of my son's dysgraphia. This is in 4th grade. This is him copying from the board. It's very, very difficult because he is copying letter by letter. You can see he still has a hard time with his letter formations and following on a line. And you can see if you look on the bottom part where it says other, the first one you can read, it says cover. I know it says cover, and then it just says like squiggly lines. And I'm like, Joe, what happened there? And we do have accommodations that he gets to take pictures because they copy from the board what their assignments are into their day timer like this. And he has the accommodation to be able to take pictures, which he does, and then he will, but he still wants to write it down because he wants to be like his peers. His peers are writing down, so he wants to write it down. And I said, what happened there? Because we can usually almost always figure it out because I know how he writes. This is not you need to work on your penmanship, because he has worked on his penmanship like you will not understand. I mean, every teacher's like, oh, he needs to work on his penmanship. I'm like, it's not getting any better. He has pretty serious dysgraphia. And so he said, it was the end of the day, and so as he was writing, they were rushing him, and they were rushing all the students because it was the end of the day and they had to get going. But so he just literally wrote a scribble line by the end of it because he was exhausted. It's the end of the day, he's already tired, and it was frustrating for him. So you can see the later in the day and the more that their system has been taxed throughout the day, meaning having to use their reading and writing systems, the more they use it, the more fatigued they get. So by the end of the day, they're wiped out. Okay, next slide, Kelly. So red flags for screening. We've talked a lot about these, so I'm going to run through them really, really quickly. And so poor phonological phonemic awareness, that inability to rhyme, all those things that we talked about up to this point, lack of familiarity with basic print concepts like print conveys meaning, we read from left to right, words are separated by spaces. Now that's one that you have to make sure that they have had that type of instruction and exposure to make sure that it's not a lack of educational opportunity. Poor knowledge of common letter-sound relationships, difficulty decoding unfamiliar words at the middle or end of 1st grade. They may have difficulty effectively mapping the appropriate phoneme graphemes. They may not apply even common rules for mono and polysyllabic words such as liking being read as licking or vice versa. difficulty learning high frequency or function words. These are the kids that their parents are practicing those words at home and they're still not getting them. Inconsistent ability to read the same word from page to page or even line to line, as you saw in the example. So for second grade and beyond, all of those that we saw in first grade, ongoing difficulties with decoding of unfamiliar words, not being able to take what we would pick up as patterns or even some underlying structure has been taught, but they're not applying it to new words. They have slow, laborious, disfluent reading. In grade-appropriate text, their oral reading is filled with substitution, omissions, or mispronunciations because they're just guessing at words. They have good listening comprehension, like they can answer questions after they've listened to a story, but they don't have good reading comprehension. They have poor spelling, as Kelly says. Difficulty writing sentences correctly, their writing doesn't reflect their oral responses. They spend an inordinate amount of time on homework. I'll just quickly say that one of the things we have parents do is keep a homework log where they dated each day, put each piece of homework they worked on, how long it took them, and how much support, because what happens is they bring that homework back and the teacher knows that they may have spent a little bit more time on it, but we're almost masking the disability by helping our students get their homework done accurately, because we want to make sure that they are turning in their homework and that it's done appropriately, because they don't want to get a bunch of red marks all over their homework or make it look like we're not being supportive parents. So doing a homework log can be very helpful for the teacher and the students. So screening for dyslexia. There's informal tools such as the CTOP, which is the Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing, the PALS, the FAR, the WADE, the LAC. These are all informal that can be like screeners to screen for dyslexia. They do not replace formal assessments. The screeners usually take somewhere between 4 and 5 minutes to up to 15, 20 minutes, depending upon the screener. But they're looking for that difficulty with processing the language. What is not appropriate, Kelly talked a little bit about these, so I'll go through them quickly. Cover overlays like the Irlen syndrome stuff, that is not going to help with dyslexia. Vision therapy is not going to help with dyslexia. Reversals, that is a common thing, and it can be, especially that BDPQ or NU or MW, those are common because of that orientation confusion, that the brain not unlearning that. Left-hand dominance, that's not necessarily an indicator of dyslexia. People with who are right-handed obviously also have dyslexia. And as Kelly stated, boys and girls, we do have an inordinate amount of boys. Boys tend to get identified a lot more frequently than girls do, but the research shows there's about the same amount of girls as boys. For formal assessment, that has to be done by somebody who's trained in doing formal assessment. They do a background information. They have to use norm, reference, standardized tests. They have to know how to implement them and to evaluate them. That's why it has to be done by somebody who has the correct credentials to do it. They're able to make comparisons to other students. And then here's a list of the assessment. This is not a complete list of the only options, but we add this so that you know these are the types of assessments that can be used. And you can't use just one piece. You actually have to have a cognitive piece to do their IQ, and then you need pieces that are going to assess the phonological, phonemic awareness, and the orthographic pieces of dyslexia. So that's going to bring us to accommodations and remediation. So accommodations are those tools that we put in place to help them access grade level content and produce grade level content, because they're intellectually able to do the academics. They need the appropriate tools to help them show that they're able to do those pieces. And of course, also for adults in the work environment. Remediation is the direct explicit instruction in the areas to help them improve their ability to decode, encode words, get to comprehension, and produce composition. So let's first quickly talk about some accommodations to be used in the classroom and at home. Accommodations should be used when there's accommodations identified. They should be used in the classroom to get through classwork and also for home for homework. But some books in auditory format, so being able to have print in an auditory format. Bookshare and Learning Ally are two organizations that if you have a print-based disability, you can access their collections, and they have huge collections in an auditory format. And if you need more information about either one of them, Google Bookshare and Learning Ally. They both are fabulous organizations to have them. It's really important that we make sure that our students have access to stuff that is at their intellectual level, and that they have access to their required academic stuff at, in an auditory format. Text-to-speech software, any computer now, or you can either download it or already has on it, text-to-speech software, so anything that's on a computer can be read to them, web pages or documents. Speech-to-text or predictive software. Speech-to-text is when you're talking to the computer and it does the writing. That takes a lot of training because you can't just talk and it does it all for you. You have to say, you know, capital and period and all, you know, you have to know how to use it. It doesn't work really well with really young voices. So that can be a challenge because they have to have a strong enough voice for the computer to pick it up. Predictive software, they have to know how to type, but it will give them spelling suggestions and word options. My son loves predictive software. He uses it all the time. Grammar check, there's one that's actually pretty decent now called Ginger Software, gingersoftware.com. It's a pretty decent grammar check. That can be very helpful for them. Reduce paper and pencil work, of course, being able to use oral responses or have a scribe. Revised assignments, not to revise content, but the quantity, so that they're putting in as much effort as their peers. A note taker or note supply, this is really, really important, especially for kids with dyslexia and or dysgraphia, because when they're taking notes, they're often doing letter by letter by letter. We do groups of words. And what they end up doing, they're so focused on getting what's on the copying down or writing down notes that they aren't getting content. And so I've had to fight really hard with a few teachers saying, well, they're going to have to know how to do this when they get to college. And I'm like, then they're still going to have their accommodations in college. And I go, this is what you're going to end up with. The notes that usually aren't very useful because they are missing stuff and they can't write on the line well if they have dysgraphia or whatever. And so they're notes that they can't even really use, and they miss the content. If you provide the notes, they're going to get the notes and they can listen to the content. Now, to keep them engaged, like my son needs his notes supplied, but to keep him engaged, especially because he has ADD, he has to do certain things with the notes. He has to highlight certain things, underline certain things, circle certain things, so that he's engaged with the notes and staying focused on what the teacher is saying at the same time. They need organizational structures like graphic organizer, word webs, things that will help them organize their thoughts. Special seat assignments on every IEP, extra time. Extra time by itself, though, is not going to help them if they don't have all the other appropriate accommodations. Not marked off for spelling, mark off for content only, unless they're doing a spelling test, but otherwise forget it. And being able to record classroom lectures. There's a lot of great tools out there now, like the Live Scribe Pen or other things. If you go to atdyslexia.com, there is, that's Jamie Martin's site, atdyslexia.com. It's a great resource. He has just tons of appropriate accommodations for students with dyslexia. And then Kelly also has a resource, wrote a blog. That's in Edutopia, Dyslexia in the General Education Classroom. Do we want to skip this, Kel?
I don't want to, but I think we have to.
Yeah, because we want to get to this.
This is a student of mine who was interviewed about what helps him in school, and he's in high school, and he basically just talks about everything Tracy was talking about. He just talks about how speech-to-text is really helpful, how he has to write things. The big message there is he just really wants people to know that he's trying and that the accommodations are helping him try. Yes, I'm going to post this. I'm concerned about posting this particular link because it's a private link. So this might be the only thing you can't access, but it's really not going to take away too much from the presentation. And maybe I just want to have this link of him out there.
Yeah. Maybe, Kelly, at the end of the presentation, we can come back to that and just play it for people who want to stay on at the end.
We can do that.
Okay. So for remediation, structured literacy, what needs to be taught? You need to teach the structure of the English language. You need to teach the phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, the phoneme grapheme options, the morphology, meaning the bases, the roots, the prefixes, the suffixes, the syllables, which is a unit of oral language with one vowel pattern, the spelling rules, the syntax, and the semantics. And it needs to be done in a systematic, explicit, multisensory way. There's some, in the dyslexia world, Orton Gillingham has been around for years and years and years. It's based on teaching the language through syllable types. which we're going to talk about in a moment. And Slingerland's basically the same thing. It's just in a classroom structure. Orton-Gillingham is based on one-on-one or small group. Slingerland was based on a small group or classroom. And then there's structured word inquiry, and we're going to talk about both of those in just a moment, I think. Okay, the slide's taking a little bit. Okay, so with Orton-Gillingham, it's based on either teaching 6 or 7 syllable types. The 6 syllable types isn't any different than the 7. They just combine vowel teams and diphthongs together into 1 syllable type. Some Orton-Gillingham approaches teaches 7 syllable types, some 6 syllable types, but you're not getting anything different. No, Orton-Gillingham is an approach. Nobody owns it. You can get training in the pure approach, or there are programs based on the approach, like common ones known are Wilson and Barton, Sounday, Language. There's a few other ones out there. There are programs out there claimed to be based on the approach that are not so good, so be careful if you're going to pick one. But it teaches based on syllable types. So there's these patterns, and there's examples of what each of those patterns are, of what the syllable types are, and they break words down, the written word down based on syllables. And it is one approach. It can be very effective for teaching many students how to read. It can help them somewhat with spelling. It isn't as strong in that area. But there are some students that this approach doesn't work for as well, so you can, that's why we talk about structured word inquiry as well. So once a student knows the first 2 syllable types, the closed and the open syllable, and knows the spelling rule that in English we don't have any words that end in the letter V, they could decode this polysyllabic word unresponsive by first identifying all the vowels, because we're training them to look for vowel patterns. We're always training them to look for vowel patterns, no matter which approach we're using. So they always have to identify the vowels. So their vowels wouldn't be marked short or long. We just, because of the PowerPoint presentation, had to do it that way. But they first mark their vowels, and then they're going to divide the word based on syllabication rules. And syllabication rules, you usually divide between 2 consonants, unless it's a consonant blend. And we should be training them to look for prefixes and suffixes. This word obviously has 2 prefixes, UN and RE. And then we have the base, then it would be SPON, and in Orton-Gillingham it would be SIVE would be the suffix. That isn't the most correct suffix, because it's really just IVE. But then they go back and they mark the vowels according to the syllable rules, whether they're short or long, and that's where you see the markings now. And so they go back and decode it, go n, un, e, re, on, spon, iv, unresponsive, and they blend it all together, and they do it syllable by syllable. Okay. If we did it through looking at a base, the base is actually SPONSE, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So that's Orton-Gillingham. You're going to apply syllable rules, spelling rules, and then if there's exceptions, and sight words. So structured word inquiry actually looks at doing it through morphology, looking at the morphemes. So this chart we give you so you can see the difference between dividing between syllables and dividing between morphemes. So if we looked at the word elevate, if you're going to do it between syllable, and with syllable division, there can be differences in how you divide the syllables. It can depend upon, some of it has to do with how you pronounce words, but also how you analyze them within the syllable type. So it would either be EL, EV, ATE as the syllable. So the first syllable is EL, second syllable EV, and the last syllable ATE, or the one below it. It doesn't really matter. And it would be pronounced out as elevate. And that would be, the student would be able to get to reading to it. Or we could do it by morphemes. And the morphemes would be the prefix E, which is an assimilated prefix of EX. And then the base is LEV, possible E. And then the suffix is ATE. Now, the LEV means to lift up. Elevate means to, and what does elevate mean? It means to lift up. LEV means to lift up. So think of another word that has that LEV that means to lift up. And if you want, you can type it in the chat box, but if you think of other words, and most of you are going to come up with words like levitate, lever, elevation, which is the next word on the list, and there's other words that are on that same base. So not only will they learn elevate, but they also learn words that are related to it, because what we're doing is we're looking at the morphemes. Now, Orton-Gillingham is very phonologically driven. It's driven by the phoneme, where Phonology is an equally important part in structured word inquiry, but we have to talk about what the sounds are after we have all the morphemes together, because phonology will shift. So if we looked at Kelly, move to the next slide, which is our ACT, and notice I'm spelling it because it's our ACT base. Now, it is a free base. It can stand by itself, and when it stands by itself as a word, we pronounce it as act. And if we add the S on the suffix S, we'd say acts. If we add the prefix on RE, we'd say react. Or if we add that suffix back on, we have reacts, right? Or reacted or reacting. But if we add that suffix ION on, we now pronounce that as action. And our T shifts from T to sh. So we can't say that this is the base act because the base is ACT. We don't know how it's pronounced until all the morphemes are together. And you'll see that the suffix is ION, not TION, because that T belongs to the base. So there is no suffix TION, there is no suffix SION, there is no suffix SSION, there is no suffix SIVE. The suffix is IVE because that T belongs to the base, not to the suffix. And you can see we can actually build lots and lots of words off of that. While we're doing the direct explicit instruction, the instructor needs to make sure that they're doing it really explicit. The explicit part is the important part for students with dyslexia. They have to understand it to such a degree that they can explain why a word is spelled the way it is and why it's pronounced the way it is. Excuse me. And so it has to be really, really clear and really, really explicit. All of the information of why the words are that way, it has to be explained. After the appropriate amount of remediation, or not the appropriate amount, after a student has had appropriate remediation, over time, their brain will start to, when they do new brain scans, start to look like a typical reader's brain, and they'll start using those other areas of the brain that the typical people without dyslexia use when they're processing language. I think on the next, so they'll start to look more like that typical reader when we do the follow-up scan. So you can see before and after remediation on this slide. The before is above. You can see they're relying primarily on that right side of their brain to process the language instead of the left, which is what people without dyslexia primarily rely on, the left side of our brain. We use a little bit of the right, but we primarily do it on the left. You can see after remediation, that scan after remediation on the bottom, they're using way more of their left side of the brain and not relying so much on the right side of their brain. Okay, so that leads us to Q&A, and we'll show, let's do some Q&A and then we can go back and show Jeremiah. Or you want to show Jeremiah first and then do Q&A?
No, excuse me. Something about this Alaskan air on both of us.
Yeah.
I want to leave time for questions. So if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, or you can not ask questions at all. It's totally up to you. Okay, so I'm going to unmute you. Oh, you know what though, Sally? For some reason, yours isn't coming all the way up. Like, I don't have access to your speaker, so I think you're going to have to type. It's really odd.
Oh, she was having a hard time getting in too.
I'm glad you can hear us, but I think you need to type it into the chat box. I really apologize for that. I'm going to give you all time to chat. I mean, if you need to. While you're doing that, I'll go look for that link.
And yeah, in case people are typing up, I'll just, while Kelly's looking for that link, I'll just go back and add a little bit about, because you keep hearing Kelly and I talk about explicit and structured with the remediation. The explicit part is like, they would be able to look at a word and explain how the graphemes, the morphemes work, where the prefixes and suffixes and base are, how the graphemes are applied and what phonemes go with it and why it is spelled exactly the way it is. Like, they need that level of instruction. And the reason they need that is because their brain can understand what it's looking for, is going all the way back to what Kelly's talking about, meaning. So they need the logic behind the language. We do not explicitly teach enough logic about our language to our kids when they're learning to read for people with dyslexia. So a lot of people, when you don't have dyslexia, you'll pick up a lot of things, but when you have dyslexia, you need the underlying logic explicitly taught at a very, at the level at which language really should be understood. And the great thing about that is if we taught our kids with dyslexia that way, that are in the classroom while they're in the classroom, it's going to help all the kids. Everybody would benefit if we all understood language the way it's structured.
Okay, so I just want to answer Kathy's question. I think teachers have difficulty distinguishing between second language learners and dyslexia. Assessment seems to be key. Is that right? Yes, and we get this question a lot. And, you know, we live in San Diego, so we understand the second language issue, or the, you know, third or fourth language. English could be their fifth language. But unfortunately, we don't have the expertise to answer those questions. And I wish I did. I even went and took a TESOL certificate program because I really wanted to understand that population better. But there's just not a lot out there about that. I think I took an assessment I took a course about how to assess students who are ELL. Okay, I'm glad I'm back. Who are ELL, and how to assess them for learning disabilities. And basically what I think I got from it was that if they are not responding the way their peers are responding, then they probably have a learning disability. But you have to look into so many different variables, like what language are they using at home? What language is their community using? What kind of support do they have at home? All these other things factor into that. So that's just a question that I just not answered for you because I can't really answer it. But at our annual conference, we are looking for an ELL dyslexia expert to present. So hopefully that will help. I have two adult students, one about 6748. They both appear to me have dyslexia. I'm wondering if they really have a good chance. Yes, 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 yes. It's just going to take them longer, Sally. So I don't know if you were here at the beginning when we talked about how we were in adult literacy for a long time before we started doing this. And yes, it's just, you know, they tend to be less consistent, you know, because life gets in the way and your brain is a little bit less plastic. It's harder to unlearn things at that age. But yes, absolutely, there's definitely a chance. And you know what? Even if they don't become perfect readers and perfect spellers, they have that chance to understand their language. And I think once they get that's really what they're looking for, in my experience. Just to understand it and know that it's not them, know that it's not their intelligence, that they're not stupid. They just really needed to know that someone didn't teach them correctly or someone didn't identify them along the way. I'm going to show you Jeremiah real quickly. He's my student. He has a lot of self-confidence. I've been with him since 4th grade. And he was being videotaped by his special education teacher because she wanted him to talk to his teachers about what he needs.
Hello, my name is Jeremiah. I have dyslexia and dysgraphia.
Oh, sorry. Huh, that's strange. It's the first video we've had trouble with.
Both of them.
How does your learning challenge impact your school experience?
So I think that's a sign that this video is just not going to work. You know what I'm guessing? I'm guessing that people are starting to wake up and get on the internet here at the hotel. And at the beginning, there wasn't as many people on.
Oh, could be.
So it's academic and social.
Let me check out my video.
It doesn't affect my school experience at all very much. I usually get around all of that. So socially, it doesn't affect me too much. Except when I have to tell people I have dyslexia. I think that's the only time it affects me a little bit. And school-wise, it can be pretty difficult if in cases like, let's say, you have to write an essay, and I do research on the essay. it's not as easy as me going online and just looking at a story about it, where there's much more information about it. I have to go on maybe YouTube or on a different website to find some kind of video that talks about it, which is easier if I have somebody talking about it and everything so I can hear it. Or I have certain programs where it's like a little robot lady talks to me about what's on the paper, so I can just like highlight it and have it speak to me. But it's a lot harder to get that information from something that you're not reading yourself, kind of listening to like a robot drone on about something, so it's a little bit more difficult. And then for writing, if I have to write an essay, then somebody has to write it. Somebody has to edit for me after I'm done writing it, which can be a hassle. And those are the main difficulties. I would say there's some other ones, but those are like the main big ones.
Okay, and how do you learn best?
I learn best by seeing, listening to other people, and then having examples for it, having examples are a big thing. So like if somebody's having an example about something, yeah.
Okay. And then what would you like your teachers or people to know about you?
Well, teachers aren't very understanding, especially at this school. You just tell them first day, you have to tell them all your disabilities, you have to take initiative. You can't just expect them to know. So you have to just tell them, explain to them what your disabilities are, and they're very understanding. Every once in a while, I need to tell them, hey, I need some extra time on this. I need somebody to edit it for me. I need you to read it for me. You pulled out for a test or something. You just tell them these things, and they're most likely be understanding. If they're not, then you have to complain. You should be able to get all the help you need. What was the question again?
What do you want teachers to know about you?
Well, teachers, that's fine, but with students, I like students to know that it's not something that needs practice. It's not something that haven't practiced it enough. I like a lot of kids who have acute dyslexia say they just need to practice and they got over it, but kids who have extreme dyslexia or dysgraphia can't just work on it and get over it. It'll be a thing that affects them for their whole life. I've been practicing since I was about, since like kindergarten. I've been getting tutored and been practicing getting pulled out to just learn how to read. So for about probably like 10 years, I'm just practicing every day. So it's not about practice. It's a real struggle. Writing is extremely difficult. I like people to know that I can't get everything in on time because of my writing. People to know that you might not be able to read my handwriting, you might not be able to read my spelling. If I text you, probably won't be able to understand my text. I'm not going to get everything right. So yeah, mainly just need other people to know that, to be understanding of, and to be patient with me.
All right, cool. Thanks.
So, like I said, Jeremiah has a lot of self-confidence. He knows how to self-advocate. He has a lot of parental support. He has a lot of support around him, so he's been able to, go into the high school and advocate for himself. He's extremely severe and profound, and without accommodations, he would not survive in high school. One thing about Jeremiah is that for 2 years he went to a private learning disabilities middle school, and someone along the way told him not to worry about anything. He could just use assistive technology and Google and computers, and everything will fix everything for him. And so I've been fighting against that for quite a while because he doesn't think he really needs any of this anymore. But, he's still a really good kid working it out. So if nobody has any other questions.
Can I just add to your comment, Kelly, because Kelly wrote a blog post about they can just use spell check. And she did a blog post that showed how just using spell check for our students is not effective because you have to have the spelling within a reasonable spelling for a spell check to catch it, and it didn't catch what percentage, Kelly, I forget what it was, that when the sample used, it was just, but yeah, it was really bad. Like it only caught like maybe 15 or 20% of the errors. And so it was using spell check for our students who don't understand the orthography of the language is not a reasonable accommodation by itself.
And just really quickly to answer your question, she said, I don't think my grandson is getting explicit systematic instruction while his main teacher was out and had substitutes. I did not believe it. What amount of time would you state needs to happen daily? It depends. It depends on your grandson's, where he is, on the severity, on a bunch of different factors. But if it's at school and he has significant issues with reading and spelling, it should be at least 30 minutes a day. And I'm trying to be reasonable of what can really happen in a school day. I used to say, you know, 45 minutes to an hour, but after a lot of observations in schools, I really think reasonably it has to be at least 30 minutes a day. If the teacher was out and your son did not get the instruction that was on an IEP, you might need to go back and I don't want to say this too much. Well, okay, there is an attorney here, so maybe she can help me out with this one. But I'm thinking you might want to contact an attorney to see if there is any compensatory education you can get from that. But I'm saying that with reading just one sentence and not really knowing the whole story, and there's no way I can know the whole story in a situation like this. But it's not acceptable to have a teacher out and then have no service. You can't do that if your student is on an IEP. If your student is on an IEP, which was an important part of my sentence.
Can you hear me?
Yes, okay. Kristen, who responded, is the attorney. So thank you.
I think I'm on mute. Oh, I'm not.
No, you're not on mute.
So, sorry. So just really quick, for people who are parents and educators, there are 2 free webinars on our website under our advocacy tab. One special ed law and dyslexia, and the other is IEPs in dyslexia, that are good, like, introductions of the advocacy process that you might want to consider watching. But I really suggest, and this sounds like a horrible shameless plug, but I'm telling you, parents call us and see us at conferences all the time and say that book, like, changed their lives in the process that they're doing. So you can acquire the book on our website, you can acquire it through Amazon, but you could also go to your public library, and if they don't have it there, ask them to acquire it so you can have access to it, but so can other parents. So, you know, if you don't have the resources to purchase the book, which I think is like $15 or so on Amazon, get to the public library to buy it, and then you can check it out from them. But I'm telling you, most parents want it for themselves because they highlight in it. I answer the phone at TTI, and we do lots of workshops, and parents come up and they're like, please sign my book because it's like changed my life. And people call all the time, they're like, that book helped me so much. And so I know it sounds like a shameless plug, but I'm telling you, it is very helpful if you're struggling in that area of making sure your child or grandchild or your student. We have teachers all the time complaining that they are having a hard time with getting students that they need tested. You should know what the law is, and then you can go to your school and say, no, according to the laws of our own state and of the federal laws, this is what is required.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and stop recording. I think our time is